The Populares were a political faction in the late Roman Republic which sought to champion the plebs and the popular reforms such as land redistribution. They were a somewhat cohesive force in Roman politics from 133 BCE till around 42 BCE, although, as they weren't a modern political party, it's a lot harder to say that they were founded on such a date and dissolved on such a date because it was much looser than that. The Populare faction traces its roots to the rise of Tiberius Gracchus around 133 BCE, when he became tribune of the plebs, and he was able to ram through a land redistribution bill, the Lex Agraria, over the protests of the Senate and even a veto from a fellow tribune by using public support. He was later assassinated while running for a second-year term. Side note, Roman elected offices were for 1 year only, so he was possibly breaking the law when doing this. By members of the Optimate faction of Roman politics. These were the conservatives who believed in the supremacy of the Senate and tradition over the popular assemblies, and were also against land reform. Even though he was assassinated, the platform Tiberius built was carried on by many other politicians, including his brother Gaius Gracchus, who was tribune of the plebs from 123 to 122 BCE, who was killed running for a third term. That platform came to include things other than land distribution, including using the popular assemblies to overrule the Senate, granting citizenship to non-Roman Italian allies, and to end discrimination against novus homos, who were people whose family had never held the consulship before, which was becoming the new sort of thing of a patrician, rather than the old distinction of being a descendant of one of the 100 people Romulus had originally picked for the Senate, because so many of them had been killed during the Second Punic War. Later notable populares included Gaius Marius, who was the first Roman to recruit landless citizens as soldiers. Previous to that, they had to have certain property qualifications. He was also a novus homo, and he went on to hold the consulship 7 times, although this is marred somewhat by the fact that he became embroiled in a bitter civil war against Sulla and the Optimate faction of Roman politics. The civil war was effectively a death blow for the Populare faction, because when Sulla eventually won after Marius died, he basically killed all of the Populare-inclined elites, and he even actually tried to have a young Julius Caesar killed, but he was eventually persuaded not to by some of Caesar's relatives, who were all quite sort of high-up nobility types. After the civil war, remnants of the Populares went on to back Pompey and then Caesar in their battles against the established order, and some Populares fled to the last Marian general, Quintus Sartorius, who controlled Roman Spain for a long time and wasn't defeated, and his army wasn't defeated until he was assassinated and Pompey finally beat him. It wasn't until the rise of Caesar and the civil wars that would end the Republic that the Populares regained power from the Optimates, and by that point it's probably more accurate to call them Caesarians rather than Populares. Despite the promises of land reform and other reforms I've been talking about, it might make it sound like the Populares were sort of the good guys of Roman politics and the Optimates were the bad guys. However, this isn't always the case. Often the Populares were using the promise of reform in order to gain power, and many, including people like Marius, who I've sort of talked about in this video, were also complicit in mass murders of basically anyone who was inclined to oppose them, just like Sulla. So basically there's no good guys and bad guys, and the Optimates were not really any worse than the Populares.